How to destroy anyone's confidence before they compete with you. Machiavelli. Did you know that 80% of battles are won before they even begin? Not physically, but mentally. Sun Tzu said, "The supreme excellence is to break the enemy's resistance without fighting." Machiavelli was even more blunt. It is better to be feared than loved when you have to choose between the two. The most brutal truth about competition is this: it doesn't matter how talented your opponent is if they don't believe in themselves. And that belief can be systematically eroded using precise psychological principles that most people are completely unaware of. Over the next few minutes, I'll reveal 7 psychological laws of mental warfare that history's greatest strategists use to defeat opponents superior in resources, talent, or position. Napoleon defeated larger armies. Steve Jobs dominated established markets. They all understood that the real battle takes place in the mind. What you're about to learn isn't about malicious destruction. It's about strategic protection. In a world where everyone is competing for your position, your resources, your attention, you need to understand how the game of psychological intimidation works. Because if you don't know how to play it, you automatically become a target. If you're ready to stop being the lamb among the wolves, if you're tired of seeing opportunities stoned by people less qualified than you but more psychologically astute, then pay attention. What comes next could determine whether you'll be the predator or the prey in your next competitions. Rule 1. The law of silent superiority, the tactic. This first law is based on the fundamental principle that genuine confidence never needs to be announced, it is perceived. In practice, this means that in any competitive situation, you should demonstrate your superiority through absolute calm and quiet competence, never through bravado or direct threats. For example, imagine you're competing for a promotion. Instead of talking about your accomplishments or trying to impress with words, you simply perform with unparalleled excellence while maintaining a calm and collected presence. This creates a specific psychological effect. Your competitors begin to question their own abilities. Applying this rule requires 3 essential elements. First, unquestionable technical competence in your field. Second, absolute emotional control under pressure. And third, a physical presence that communicates authority without arrogance. When you dominate a room just by walking into it. When your words carry weight because they are rare and precise. When you solve problems that others consider impossible with apparent ease. You are not just competing. You are redefining the standards of competition. The psychology behind the reason this tactic works is rooted in how our primitive brain processes social hierarchies. When you demonstrate silent superiority, you activate what neuroscientists call automatic status recognition, an unconscious process where the brain categorizes individuals into hierarchical positions based on subtle cues. Social psychology. Studies show that people who exhibit calm competence are automatically perceived as more intelligent, trustworthy, and powerful than those who need to promote themselves verbally. This is because the human brain is programmed to recognize true leaders through behavior, not words. The expected reaction from others will be a gradual decrease in their own self-confidence because this touches on fundamental psychological needs. The need for hierarchical validation and the need for social comparison. When they can't read you or predict your reactions, they begin to question themselves. Rule 2. The law of calculated uncertainty, the tactic. This second law reveals that uncertainty is a devastating psychological weapon when used strategically. The key lies in understanding that the human brain consumes more energy trying to resolve unknowns than processing certainties. In practical terms, this translates into keeping your competitors guessing about your next moves. When you find yourself in a direct competitive situation, instead of doing what 90% of people do, which is telegraphing your intentions or following predictable patterns, you must create an aura of controlled unpredictability. Correctly executing this rule involves 3 distinct phases. The observation phase, where you map your competitors' behavioral patterns. the deconstruction phase, where you break your own predictable routines, and finally, the implementation phase, where you act in a seemingly random but strategically calculated manner. For example, if you always respond to emails immediately, start drastically varying your response times. If you always present ideas in a linear fashion, start using unconventional approaches. If you always attend certain meetings, strategically skip them sometimes. This unpredictability forces your competitors to spend mental energy trying to figure you out instead of focusing on their own strategies. The psychology behind. The effectiveness of this strategy is based on the psychological phenomenon known as increased cognitive load. Research led by Daniel Kahneman has shown that when the brain encounters unpredictable patterns, it automatically allocates more resources to processing, reducing the capacity available for other tasks. This is because our limbic system, responsible for emotions and quick decisions, interprets unpredictability as a potential threat. Our limbic system, responsible for emotions and quick decisions, interprets unpredictable behavior as an indicator of higher power or hidden knowledge. The result is that other people unconsciously begin to overestimate your capabilities and underestimate their own. They do this not because they've been tricked, but because you're tapping directly into their brain's primitive warning systems, creating low-level anxiety that erodes confidence. Rule 3. The law of the psychological mirror, the tactic. The third law teaches us that you can undermine someone's trust simply by reflecting back their own amplified insecurities. This is perhaps one of the most counterintuitive strategies because it goes against our natural social instincts to be agreeable or diplomatic. Most people believe they should hide or ignore their competitors' weaknesses. But the reality is that subtly acknowledging them and reflecting them back has a devastating psychological effect. When you apply this rule correctly, you force your competitors to confront their own limitations in a magnified way. The implementation process is subtle but powerful. You start by carefully observing the weaknesses, fears, or insecurities your competitors demonstrate through body language, word choice, or compensatory behaviors. Then, gradually incorporate indirect references to these weaknesses into your interactions. And finally, mirror these characteristics back in magnified form through your own confident behavior. A practical example would be if you notice a competitor is insecure about their technical expertise. They constantly mention certifications, use excessive jargon, or defend themselves when not questioned. In this situation, applying the third law would mean demonstrating technical knowledge naturally and effortlessly, asking seemingly innocent but profound technical questions, and maintaining a simplicity that contrasts with their defensive complexity. The psychology behind. This rule explores a fundamental paradox of human psychology. The more we try to hide an insecurity, the more it becomes visible to attentive observers. Studies in behavioral economics, especially the work of Amos Tversky, demonstrate that people tend to project their own weaknesses into ambiguous situations. The mechanism behind this is known as reverse psychological projection. When you subtly mirror someone's insecurities by displaying the opposite quality, you create what psychologists call amplified cognitive dissonance, which results in an accelerated erosion of self-esteem. This works because it taps into two deep psychological needs: the need for internal consistency and the need for external validation. The brain interprets their natural display of the quality they strive to display as evidence of their own inadequacy, which triggers a self-sabotaging response that works directly in their favor. Rule 4. The law of strategic information, the tactic. Fourth law reveals that information is power, but selectively shared information is a psychological weapon. The fundamental principle is that you should always know more about your competitors than they know about you, and occasionally demonstrate that knowledge in a casual but impactful way. In practice, this means developing a competitive intelligence system. You meticulously research your competitors' backgrounds, behavioral patterns, past successes, and, crucially, failures. Then, at strategically chosen moments, you let slip that you have this information, never threateningly, always seemingly casually. Implementation requires three components. First, systematic data collection through social media, casual conversations, and behavioral observation. Second, careful analysis to identify patterns, weaknesses, and emotional triggers. And third, calculated disclosure of this information at moments that maximize psychological impact. For example, if you discovered that a competitor had a significant failure on a similar project 2 years ago, you might casually mention challenges in projects like this, or ask a specific question that demonstrates knowledge of the details. This isn't a direct threat, it's a subtle demonstration that you have inside information. The psychology behind this strategy exploits the phenomenon known as informational vulnerability. When someone perceives that you have access to information about them that they didn't expect you to have, it activates a primitive stress response. Related to the fear of exposure, social neuroscience research shows that when we detect that someone has information about us that we considered private, the prefrontal cortex goes into threat scanning mode, consuming cognitive resources and reducing performance in other areas. The psychological result is a feeling of vulnerability and disadvantage. The person begins to question, what else do they know? How did they get this information? What can they do with it? This underlying anxiety erodes confidence and creates a dynamic where they constantly feel at a disadvantage, even when they are not. Rule 5. The law of unattainable excellence. The tactic. The fifth law states that you should always operate at a SID level slightly above what your competitors consider possible, creating a moving target they can never reach. This isn't about neurotic perfectionism, it's about setting standards that consistently raise the bar for the competition. The secret is to identify the metrics that matter most in your area and then consistently exceed those metrics by seemingly effortless margins. If everyone delivers 10-page reports, you deliver 15-page analyses with unique insights. If everyone arrives 10 minutes early to meetings, you arrive 15 minutes early, already prepared and organizing the room. Execution requires systematic discipline. First, you map out all the established standards of excellence in your competitive environment. Second, you develop internal processes that allow you to consistently exceed those standards. Third, you present this superiority as your normal standard, never as extraordinary effort. The key is to make your excellence seem natural and sustainable. When asked how you maintain these standards, your answer should always suggest that it's simply how you operate, not a special effort. That's just how I do things. Or, I didn't know there was another way. Are responses that psychologically devastate competitors' confidence. The psychology behind this rule works through the psychological principle of word social comparison. When people are constantly confronted with superior performance standards that seem effortless, they begin to question their own fundamental capabilities. The human brain is wired to conserve energy, so when it realizes that achieving a certain level of excellence would require significant sustained effort, it automatically recalibrates expectations downward as a protective mechanism. This is known as defensive disengagement. Neurologically, when someone perceives you consistently operating above what they consider possible with their current resources, it activates what researchers call the learned inadequacy response. The brain literally learns that competing directly with you is a losing battle, leading to an automatic reduction in effort and ambition. Rule 6. The law of controlled time pressure. The tactic. The sixth law teaches that time is a dimension of competition that can be manipulated to your advantage. The principle is simple. While others react to time, you must control it, speeding up when it pressures them and slowing down when it frustrates them. In practice, this means completely controlling your own work pace and decision-making, becoming unpredictable over time. Sometimes you deliver results in half the expected time, creating pressure on competitors who are still in the middle of the process. Other times you deliberately delay important decisions, forcing others to wait for your response or approval. effective. Implementation requires 3 skills. First, the ability to genuinely speed up your production when strategically advantageous. Second, the ability to slow down without losing quality when patience is an advantage. And third, perfect timing to know when to use each approach. For example, in a contract competition, you might submit your proposal a week ahead of schedule with exceptional quality, forcing other competitors to rush their processes and potentially compromising quality. Or you might be the last to submit after reviewing all the other proposals, creating anxiety in your competitors about what you're preparing. The psychology behind this strategy exploits the fundamental relationship between time and anxiety. Cognitive psychology research shows that when people can't predict or control the temporal aspects of a competition, it activates stress systems that impair cognitive performance. The phenomenon known as asymmetric time pressure demonstrates that when you control timing, you force others to react to your pace rather than operating at their optimal pace. This creates a compound advantage. You operate in your zone of excellence while forcing others to operate outside their comfort zone. Neuroscientifically, temporal uncertainty activates the amygdala, which releases cortisol, the stress hormone. Elevated cortisol levels impair working memory, reduce creativity, and compromise decision-making. Essentially, you're using time as a weapon to induce a physiological state that favors your performance over theirs. Rule 7. The law of the invisible. Alliance. The tactic. The 7th and most powerful law reveals that competitions are rarely individual. They take place in social ecosystems. The strategy is to systematically build a network of influence that works in your favor while isolating your competitors from the same. Support networks. This isn't about obvious corporate politics or blatant social manipulation. It's about making yourself genuinely valuable to key people in your competitive environment so that they naturally root for your success. You identify the influencers, decision makers, and opinion leaders, and consistently add value to their lives and goals. Implementation requires a long-term approach. First, carefully mapping the relevant influence ecosystem. Second, identifying how you can add unique value to each key person. Third, consistently building relationships based on real mutual value, not obvious self-interest. The crucial difference is that you're building genuine relationships based on competence and value, not manipulation or flattery. When it comes to competition, these people naturally gravitate toward the candidate they already know, trust, and value. For example, if you're competing for a position, you've already built strong relationships with decision makers based on previous projects where you've added real value to their work. When the time comes to select you, you're not just another candidate. You're someone whose competence and character have already been tested and proven. The psychology behind this law exploits the psychological bias known as the mere exposure effect, combined with social confirmation bias. People tend to favor those with whom they have had positive interactions and whose abilities have been socially validated by others. Social neuroscience shows that when we already have a positive impression of someone based on past experiences, our brain actively seeks out evidence that confirms that positive impression, creating a reinforcing cycle. This is known as biased information processing. The result is that your competitors aren't just competing against your technical skills. They're competing against a network of relationships, positive impressions, and prior social validation. It's a fundamentally unequal competition where you already have a structural advantage before it even officially begins. 4. The change of mindset. Now that you know these 7 fundamental laws, it's important to understand that they aren't just isolated tactics. They represent a completely new philosophy for navigating the competitive world. The silent strategist mindset. True power comes not from destroying others through malice, but from protecting your position, resources, and opportunities through strategic superiority. It's the difference between being a bully who intimidates through brute threats and being a strategist who wins through superior intelligence. When you internalize these rules, something fundamental changes in your perception. you begin to see competitions not as direct clashes of brute force, but as complex psychological games where victory is determined long before the physical or technical confrontation. You recognize that most people are competing on the superficial level skills, resources, obvious networking, while you operate on the deeper level, psychology, perception, and influence. This isn't a mindset of malicious exploitation. It's a mindset of strategically protecting one's position and creating a sustainable competitive advantage. It's about no longer being a victim of the psychological warfare others will inevitably wage against you, but a conscious and superior participant. In that game, the difference lies in intent and execution. Predators use these techniques to destroy unnecessarily. Strategists use them to win legitimate competitions against adversaries who might otherwise have unfair advantages through politics, superior resources, or privileged positioning. Operate from this elevated mindset. You're not just winning competitions, you're redefining how competitions are played in your environment. 5. The mastery of art. Psychological warfare isn't optional in the modern world. It's already being waged against you by competitors who understand these dynamics intuitively or through experience. The only choice you have is whether to be a conscious and skilled player or an unwitting victim. The 7 laws we explore today are not dirty tricks or malicious manipulation. They are fundamental principles that govern how human beings compete, influence, and are influenced in high-pressure situations. Machiavelli, Sun Tzu, Napoleon, all the great strategists in history understood that the real battle takes place in the opponent's mind. You now have the tools to never again be surprised or outmatched by opponents who are psychologically more astute but technically inferior. You can anticipate attacks on your confidence, adapt to intimidation attempts, and, most importantly, proactively establish a psychological advantage in any competition you enter. But remember, knowledge without application is just intellectual entertainment. Each of these laws must be practiced, refined, and integrated into your natural behavior. Start with one at a time. Observe the results. Adjust your approach based on the feedback you receive. Over time, these strategies will become second nature, and you'll find that you no longer need to use techniques. You'll simply become someone who naturally commands respect, builds competitive advantage, and navigates the world of business and relationships with an authority that others sense but can't explain. The competition is not about who is stronger. It's about who thinks deeper. If this content expanded your perspective on real power, please like it. Subscribe to the channel for more psychological dominance strategies. And in the comments, tell me which of these 7 laws most impacted your way of thinking about competition. Your answer could become content for the next video.